This is The Camp with Zach Heilprin and the Athletics' Jesse Temple.
Yes, welcome into The Camp. I'm Zach Heilprin. That's the Athletics' Jesse Temple. Badgers getting ready to travel down to West Lafayette to take on Purdue on Friday night, looking to make it 17 straight wins over the Boilermakers. Jesse, what were you doing in 2003, which is the last time Purdue beat Wisconsin?
I had just started my freshman year of college, so I was about to have a glorious 4 years. But it had nothing to do with football.
Playing basketball, killing it. Playing basketball.
Division III style.
Yeah, the 2003 game was not a great game, but it was I should say it was a really good game, but it didn't go Wisconsin's way. The 2004 game that started this streak was an all-timer. And if you're a Wisconsin fan, really started the downward trend of the Purdue program under Joe Tiller. It was never the same as it was that day. Game day was in West Lafayette. It was the matchup of unbeaten teams, and Wisconsin went this way and Purdue went this way the rest of the aughts. So that's what people have been dealing with, but that is not the matchup they're going to see on Friday night. It's going to be a 1-2 Purdue squad versus a 2-1 Wisconsin squad that has, is 2-1, but has not played necessarily great football and has a lot of people questioning a lot of things and has a lot of people wondering, why aren't they doing this and why aren't they doing that? And I think I'd like to get into that a little bit, Jesse, because I know you wrote about it for Wednesday, that there are so many complaints that people have about what has happened these first three games, because everyone was expecting, and I think ourselves included, we're expecting better of Wisconsin to this point than what they've showed. Again, 2-1, have not lost a conference game yet, going to go down to Purdue and have a chance to set this season off on the right note, or the conference season off on the right note. But there are people having issues. And so you put this piece together addressing some of these issues. What is the one that stands out? Which one's at the top of the list here for you?
Well, the one that is mentioned first is about the offense, because that was the biggest talking point in the offseason about the potential of this offense, what it would look like in the air raid, and safe to say through three games, they've not been what anybody thought it was going to be. And what I said is, so basically the article, it made a statement that a lot of people have been saying, and then I gave my rating on a 10-point scale of what the panic meter should be.
Sounds very overreaction or no-ish.
That's essentially what it is. Yeah. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. But the more these kinds of games stack up, the more it makes you wonder, what is this offense going to be able to do against better competition? They just haven't been able to merge the passing game and the rushing attack in the same game. I think there have clearly been encouraging signs, as we laid out in the previous show. They've outscored opponents 48-7 in the third quarter. The problem is they've been outscored in the first half of games, and you're just not supposed to be in a close game at halftime against Buffalo or Georgia Southern. And obviously you see what happens when you get down by multiple scores on the road against Washington State. It doesn't matter how great you play in one quarter. It's not enough to win. So, obviously that is one of the concerns and one of the things that I think is high up there on the panic meter.
I'm wondering for you, and this kind of goes off a question that I was asked as part of our Twitter questions I didn't get to. I'm going to tweak it a little bit because it just straight up says Wisconsin can't run the spread, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think they've had some issues, but I'm wondering why you think places like Colorado, places like USC, whether it's with Shedeur Sanders this year or obviously Caleb Williams is a great quarterback, but they hit the ground running with that new offense and a new system, and it doesn't seem that there's been any hiccups along the way. Why do you think there's been hiccups for Wisconsin that maybe haven't been seen elsewhere?
That's a really good question. Every situation is different, and with USC, you've got a guy who's a number one NFL draft pick and a Heisman Trophy guy. Like, Tanner Mordecai is, I think, done pretty well here through three games, despite not having huge touchdown numbers. He's only thrown 2 touchdown passes, but you look and he's throwing for about 234 yards passing per game. There have just been a handful of hiccups that have contributed to the offense stalling. But the USC one is a bit of an outlier because they just went and got give me the best player at all these positions in college football, give me the best wide receiver in college football from Pittsburgh. I know this was last year. So I think that's a little bit different. And Colorado's different too, because they brought in 60 guys. I know Wisconsin went after the transfer portal hard, but you're still marrying this system with people who were a part of something entirely different. Like your offensive line, other than Joe Huber, is the same offensive line from last year, and it's much different. And maybe it sounds like I'm trying to make excuses, but I'm also just trying to come up with reasons why it may be taking a little bit longer.
It wasn't a fair question to include Shedeur Sanders and Caleb Williams in the conversation with what Wisconsin's dealing with. Caleb Williams is going to be the 1 or number 2 overall pick in next year's draft. Shedeur Sanders has shown that he has an opportunity to be a high-level draft pick. Tanner Mordecai wants to prove that he can play in the NFL, but these other 2 guys, I feel like are, so I kind of answered my own question. I mean, they have a good quarterback. They don't have a first round quarterback running the offense, which I think kind of obviously changes some things. And they don't necessarily have a Jordan Addison or insert USC wide receiver here either. So people are probably screaming at their screens or screaming at their phones like you're an idiot. Why would you try and bring those 2 up and compare the 2? But it's just because they hit the ground running so easily. And I think that there's a little bit of a difference that saying Wisconsin can't run this, or it just may take a little bit longer than we've seen from these other schools trying to implement it.
And I think that's fair. And a lot of the guys who are contributing were recruited under a different style and system. And I think they're still trying to figure it out. And I mean, another panic meter question is that I've heard, well, Chez and Braelon Allen should be utilized differently. And I don't know whether that's just, it could be touches, but it's very clear at this point, it doesn't help that Braelon isn't fully healthy, but they're trying to give him the ball out in space on these checkdowns and swing routes, and he's averaging 2.5 yards a catch. He leads the team in receptions, and he's got like 41 receiving yards. And that's just, it's not working right now. And so it's part of this feeling out process. And, I think Luke Fickell provided probably one of the best quotes this week when he was talking about the team. And essentially what he said was, well, he said this in a couple of different ways. One was he said he was talking to somebody and mentioned, Rome wasn't built in 3 weeks, but we kind of wish what happened in Madison was built a little bit quicker than 3 weeks. But the other thing that he said was, essentially, we're not where we thought we would be. And that doesn't mean we're not going to keep trying, but he said there's a lot of meat on the bone there. I think it certainly caught my attention. It's not like it's an outlandish, jaw-dropping statement, but it's just acknowledging what everyone else has seen.
So there were a couple of clips that I ended up using on the radio for my updates that I do during the day, and that was one of them because it did kind of stand out. He kind of caught himself there at the end because he was like, we thought we would be who we would have an idea of who we are and we know who we are and all this stuff. And then he's like, it's not that we don't agree with the way we're going. It's just, maybe we wish we would have been there. And he didn't say this part, but he thinks, as I think we all agree, that they would be further ahead of where they are right now. And there's little meat left on the bone. And I know he was kind of taking that from what Greg Scruggs told another reporter, and he kind of used it a couple different times. So maybe he had that on the mind, but there is they have opportunities to show that they are much better than we've seen so far, and they just haven't been able to capitalize on them. And you mentioned Braelon, and I think he's certainly a part of that. If you think about back to the Washington State game, the opportunities that he had, the 13 touches that he got, whether it was 7 carries or 6 catches, those are opportunities that they weren't able to take advantage of. I need to throw this one in here because it is a topic on in my timeline. It's a topic in my messages. It's a topic, I think, on some message boards as well. When are people going to agree that Chez Mellusi is the better running back than Braelon Allen?
Are you wanting me to agree with that statement?
I'm wondering how you feel about that and whether he was wasted as a running back, because that is where the conversation is right now in some of the parts of the fan base where they're at right now.
I've heard the question of, is he a better fit for this offense than Braelon Allen? And I think it's it's not fair right now because Braelon is hurt. And even Braelon being hurt for the last 2 games, I know he wasn't all that effective in week 2 against Washington State, but he had 12 carries and 90 plus yards and 2 touchdowns and helped to turn the game around last week against Georgia Southern. He certainly earned the carries that he's getting. I mean, yeah, Chez has a skill set that I think aligns well with this air raid offense. I'm actually a little surprised that Braelon has, what does he have, 15 or 16 receptions, and they've thrown Chez has 2 receptions, but they obviously see different ways to get Chez the ball through carries. So I think they need both of them, and it's just I don't think it's like, well, one guy is better than the other and should be getting a significantly larger share of the carries. Chez has a few more because he started the last game, and Braylon's coming back from injury. But I it's hard for me not to get hung up on that part because it's just not a fair comparison right now. And anybody who has watched Braelon the last couple of games can see that he's battling through something. So when he's fully healthy, you give Braelon more touches. Now, right now, I can understand why you would give Chez a few more, but it's more to protect Braelon and help get both those guys through the season.
I feel like we've seen Braelon like this these last couple games more than we've seen him the other way around. Is that unfair?
In terms of battling an injury and not being his full self?
Not being the Braelon that we saw for large stretches of his freshman year.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this on the last show. It's through no fault of his own. It's just the way that it's gone. Both seasons, his freshman and sophomore seasons, he got banged up and it just wore away at him across the season. And I can even remember something that Paul Chris said to that effect of that he felt it wore Braelon down. And I think it was last year referencing Braelon's freshman season, but that's fair. It's just been very challenging. And it doesn't matter if you are 245 pounds and are built like a Greek god. It's football, and sometimes these things can take a toll in a way that you didn't expect. But I don't know how long it's going to take for him to get back to that explosive Braelon, but I think we're all waiting to see.
As long as he's playing every week, I don't think he can. This isn't like, to me, this is not something that's just going to heal all of us. Like, again, we don't know the exact injury, right? We don't. But based on the way he's running, this doesn't feel like it's a shoulder injury. Like we knew, there were some issues last year, right? But he also was dealing with some lower body stuff. This feels lower body to me, making an assumption, and I don't have anything to back that up off because he's, certainly not telling us. But I don't know how you all of a sudden are better and get better playing through a lower body injury that you're going to continue to take hits on. I think he is going to be battling this throughout the entire season, unless he takes time off. Now, again, we don't know the injury, and so I'm putting you in a tough spot, and I'm not going to make you answer that question, but I think it's very, very difficult to get back to 100%, or not even get back to 100%, get back to being the explosive player. And we saw shades of it last week, right? We saw a little bit here and there, but you could still tell he wasn't 100% or even 95%. I still think he can be productive, but he's never going to be I hate to say this, he's not going to be like the top 5 back in the country if he's playing dinged up the way that he is.
Yeah, the challenge too is you want to be able to get enough reps during the practice week to be comfortable. And obviously you're not getting tackled there. But to your point, you're not able to rest. And this week, it's 6 days of in between games, which is highly unusual for Wisconsin's schedule. I went back and looked, and this doesn't normally happen. They play their Friday game in the season opener. They've done that 4 or 5 times.
Have they ever played on the short rest?
I'm not aware of that. I went back several years, but you do the silver lining here potentially is that after this game, you do have your bye week. And while it's not a ton of time, I think we've seen over the years that opportunity can significantly help guys who are battling whatever dings it may be. So that has to be the hope is, all right, let's get you through Friday night, and we're going to take this week off, take it easy. And then you don't have the game until the following Saturday. So you've got what, 15 days?
Yeah.
And that's the best that they can hope for.
Right. Again, the other thing is that I think you still need reps in the offense because it's not something like it's on the back of your hand. It's not like you've been in this for 3 years and that you know exactly what each week is and that you're so comfortable that you don't need to practice. I don't think they're at that point with this offense. We heard Luke Fickell talk about that. We need every single day, Wednesday, Thursday, even Friday practices. They need these reps. They need these things because we're not at that point. Usually we could, he was talking about once you've been in a place for 3 or 4 years, you can start to pull back on some of those Friday practices and maybe not go as hard. And he said that that's not where they're at right now. So we'll see. We'll see. This was not, what were some of the other ones that you're going to, we won't go through all of them, but what are some of the other questions that stood out to you?
Well, the big ones defensively are, hey, the D line hasn't been able to get enough pressure and the secondary is giving up way too many big plays. Now, the D line thing, Luke Fickell, I think, laid it out pretty well. And I have said before, I will cede to him when it comes to commentary on defensive line play, since he was pretty damn good starting 50 straight games at Ohio State and obviously knows how to coach that position group. And he pointed out, you look at those 5 interceptions, and I went back and looked at them, and 3 of them were directly impacted by defensive linemen making a play. Ben Barton went right up the middle and blew it up to lead to Hunter Woller's first interception. And James Thompson Jr. has been an absolute monster here, contributed to 2 of the others. He tipped one, that was a pick, and the other, he had his hand just like right all over Georgia Southern's quarterback. And so Luke was talking about how sacks are the most overrated stat, but disruptions are something that don't really get noticed. And I think they still have work to do, obviously, on the D line, but that at this point, for me, is less of a concern than the big plays that we're seeing on the back end. Because if they're going to have issues in the non-conference play, well, you're putting it on film and you're going to be playing better players, and they're going to use some of those concepts, whether it's, the rub routes or the wheel routes or just anything. If they can get manned up,
man beaters,
they're going to feel like they can do something positive.
Yeah. Man beaters. And they've been beaten at times. And again, how many times they throw the ball the other day?
That's the other thing.
Georgia Southern?
A million.
Yeah.
And the opponents through 3 games are averaging 42 passes per game. Now, obviously, the numbers go up when Bryn throws it 50 something, but it's not like the other guys weren't chucking it around. So that's going to contribute to opportunities to give up big plays. Having said that, there have been several, and it has to be a concern.
There have been, and I think that's certainly something that we're going to look at Friday night, and because Hudson Card's going to take some shots down the field. I think that is a guarantee on Saturday or on a Friday night that we're going to see much of what we've seen especially these last 2 weeks with them taking shots down the field. And then we didn't see it a ton during Buffalo. They weren't confident, I think, that they were going to be able to protect their quarterback. And yet they still made some big plays because they were able to get some guys free on not shorter routes, but things where you didn't necessarily have to hold the ball for an extended period of time. And I think Hudson Card is going to challenge him down the field, and he's got the arm to do it. So that'll be certainly something to watch on Friday night. The other thing to watch on Friday night is which Badgers show up in the first half, because I think that continues to be, and I know we're going to hammer to death. We hammered to death on Sunday, but I wanted to ask you about this because this question came in after we recorded in regards to the splits, because they are insane. You've talked about them, right? You've talked about especially the scoring. And Scott is wondering, is it a case of the coaching staff coaching to their philosophy in the first half versus adjusting and coaching to their strengths in the second half?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. I mean, one other split that I found interesting is the success that they've had on the ground in the second half. And I don't know what that is the result of. But if you just look at total rushing yards and attempts, they're averaging something like 3.3 yards per rushing attempt in the first half. In the second half, they're averaging 8.1. And even if you take away Chez Malusi's 89-yard touchdown run against Buffalo, I believe it's around 6.4 yards per rushing attempt. So I don't know why it is so drastically different in the second half. I mean, it's not, in my mind, it's not the coaching staff straying from its philosophy and loosening things up in the second half. I think it comes down to execution. And that's another thing that Fickell talked about this week as well. And it stemmed from the question that I asked about, do you feel like you're still learning how to use Chez and Braelon? And he didn't necessarily directly respond to what those two guys could be doing differently, because he said, we're evaluating everybody. How do we best use Hunter Wohler, our two inside linebackers, and get them out of their comfort zone a little bit? But he did talk about that when you believe in something, you have to stick with it. And he said, you don't go from 11 or 12 personnel to 22 personnel and then back. And I think that's at least an indication that they're sticking with the plan. I just don't know what the reason is for why it has been so much more effective in the second half. I think that's something beyond, oh, they got juiced up or they suddenly got fired up. I don't think it's not like they're uninspired to start games. I don't believe that. It comes down to execution.
It's interesting because Muma talked about it a little bit today when he was asked about the slow starts, and he kind of mentioned that there is a little bit of a mindset at the half because they've been drilled into finishing, and maybe it just kicks in. And I wanted to be like, oh, why don't you give that message before the game and be like, hey, how about we finish all 4 quarters? And I didn't say that, of course, but it is something that I thought about. Like, yeah, okay, I get that. So, all right, if you think that's the reason why, if you think just the mindset is different, well, then figure out how to get the mindset different before the game. And that to me should not be that hard of a challenge. These guys have played football well, I shouldn't say it about Muma, but they most of them have played football their entire lives, right? They have been playing since they're 7, 8 years old, and a lot of them have been playing tackle football that long. So they know what needs to happen at the beginning of a game, the type of play and the type of mindset you have to have at the beginning of the game. It should not be something that needs to be said, but if it needs to be said, say it. Just say it and get after it. But as we heard from Jake Chaney after the game, Luke Fickell has not MF'd him yet. Maybe he'll MF him before the game on Friday night. I don't know. Because those things, I would agree. I go back to Dave Aranda and how he was so calm about everything. And he would never get into guys. He would talk to them calmly and just talk to them and understand them and have a conversation. And then there was one game. I don't remember which game it was, but I think it was I want to say it was in 2015. I think it was the Paul Chris first year. It could have been earlier. It's irrelevant what game it was, but they were getting worked, absolutely worked. And after the second or third drive, he gathered everybody over by him and just went off. And I remember talking to guys after the game, like it opened up their eyeballs and they were locked in after that moment because they're like, holy crap, this guy never goes off. He went off and it kind of lit a fire underneath him. And it wasn't like they were doing, like they just weren't locked in. And because it was something he never did, when he did it, it got their attention. And I'm not saying that that's what Luke Fickell does. Needs to do. I'm just saying when you don't do it a lot, I think it hits harder when you end up doing it. Do you remember that or no?
Vaguely.
No? All right.
You have a better memory than me. I can't remember what I had for dinner 2 days ago.
I'm a big sideline guy. I love watching the sideline, what's happening on the sideline during games, because I think it tells you a lot of like where the team's at mentally and where things in it's where I spent most of my time playing football on the sidelines. So, I have I don't have a good feel for what is happening down there, because we're, 8 floors or 8 stories high, but watching this team, it gives you a little bit of an idea of what's happening. And there was something that stood out to me, and I pointed it out to you on Saturday, and we watched it play out a little bit more. And that was one of the wide receivers, CJ Williams, who came in here as the highest rated recruit, even though he was a transfer, but the highest rated recruit to ever play wide receiver for Wisconsin. And he has this big spring, and he's a starter at wide receiver. And then come game one, he's not. It's Bryson Green. And through these 3 games to this point, CJ Williams has caught 4 passes. The other, technically what you want to call the starting wide receivers, the other 4 that are in this rotation with CJ Williams, the top 5 guys that have played the most, Chimere Dike has 8. Will Pauling has 11. Skylar Bell has 13, and Bryson Green has 6. And I'm not surprised that Will Pauling and Skylar Bell have the most catches. We know how much Phil Longo loves his slot receiver. He famously said that, after his kids and his wife, that's his, that may be his biggest love. But CJ Williams has not been necessarily involved as much as I think a lot of people thought he would be. And it felt like, at least on the sideline, that he was a little upset about it. And he was kind of mingling around the huddle on the sideline while the other wide receivers were talking. He was walking away and walking back and walking, it just didn't look. And again, going all the way back to trying to decipher body language, I'm not going to do that. So I'm not going to say what he was thinking in that moment, but you had an opportunity to chat with him on Tuesday. So you were able to ask him what he was thinking in that moment and what exactly was happening on the sideline during Wisconsin's game when it was still a close game there in the first half.
Well, what he told me is that he was more upset with the situation and the fact that the team wasn't playing well. And again, you can only go by the responses that you get. We know he's a competitive, fiery guy, but I think it's also clear that there's been some frustrations with the opportunities that have been available. He said all the right things in my conversation with him about working hard and keeping his head down. And I had a chance to talk to CJ's dad this week. And one of the things that he said he has talked to his son about is, hey, it's important to keep perspective on things. Like, he's only a sophomore, and Luke Fickell talked about this. Chimere Dike talked about this. People maybe forget that he's still a pretty young guy as a college player because his talent is beyond what his age is, but it's going to take some time. But what his dad says is keep perspective, because you're still with the twos. You're in the 2 deep at a Power 5 school, and you need to use that and not use potential perceived slights or anything like that to play your best football. And so, but I think it has been tough. I mean, there's no way you can deny that aspect of this. He comes into spring practice and he is one of the stars of the show. Yes, the bulk of the highlight plays came against reserves, some of whom are no longer with the program because they slid down the depth chart, but you did see those glimpses. And really it was one of those, oh my God, like, did you see those couple of plays? Well, that's a difference maker, the likes of which Wisconsin has rarely had. But Bryson Green wasn't healthy, and then Bryson gets healthy, and it is very clear early in camp that Bryson's probably going to be the guy. You just wonder, well, who's going to get pushed out here? And Bryson continued to make plays. His physicality stands out. His experience stands out. Now, it's not like CJ isn't playing at all. He's getting snaps, but not a ton of targets. And I think he would have expected more through 3 games. So it's definitely been a challenge, and it's just all part of the process. He's still got the talent, but as you know, there's only one football to go around.
And that's actually because I was wondering about it as well. And I know you were going to be doing a story on this, but I, asked Tanner Mordecai about it. And I prefaced the question by saying, I know there's only one ball to go around, and I know all these guys want it more. And he's like, yeah. And I said, but how do they handle it? And he thought, and I asked specifically about CJ, but he mentioned all these guys. And he said, if we get the offense going the way that we think it can go, the way that we know it can go, all these guys are going to get more opportunities. But the offense has to get revved up to the point where, in grooving to the point where that can happen. He thinks when that does happen, they're all going to be happy because they're all going to get the ball more than certainly they have in these first few games. They just haven't been able to rev the offense up, especially in the first half. It hasn't been good enough in the first half to be on the field as much as they would like to be on the field. And so he said CJ and all those other guys are handling it well. But again, frustration can boil over on in a situation like that on the sideline. And again, they have 9 more opportunities here in the regular season, and I think CJ Williams is going to be a big part of it at some point along the way here as they do get things revved up, because I still believe that they can, but it is going to probably take a little patience, and that probably is difficult for, hell, it's difficult for fans to have patience, much less the guys that are in there thinking and believing that they can make a huge impact every single time they have the ball in their hands. And I think we kind of saw it a little bit. CJ had that catch and run against Georgia Southern that was, he broke a tackle, got downfield, got the first down. Like, those are the type of things that I think he can do, but you do them even more. And I know that people are gonna be like, well, he got opportunities against Washington State and didn't make the most of them. I think those 2 plays were one was a really good play by a DB, and the other one really, he didn't really have a chance at it because the ball was too far. So there are going to be more opportunities for him, and I think he's got an opportunity, and I think he's going to take advantage of them.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And it's hard when you have 4 drives that end in 3 and outs in the first half. You only get so many drives. So how is anybody supposed to do anything? And when you have 4 3 and outs and majority of your drives end in punts, but it's a balancing act because Bryson's going to get his, and they like Chimray on the other side. And so that's the spot that CJ finds himself in. And he just has to realize that when his time comes, he's got to take advantage of it.
So one more before we go here. Bucky Garcia says the program seems to lack energy. Feels like opposing teams are more motivated to play. Players look like they're bored. Fans are quiet. Student section's half empty. Is this due to the teams we play, state of the program, or do we need to start selling alcohol? And he's half joking. I would not joke about that last point. That definitely needs to happen. It's going to be happening at the Kohl Center this year. It needs to happen at Camp Randall. I think it's just around the corner. That said, throw that one out the window. What do you think?
I think it was more of a narrative last year when you had the team's own players saying it felt like they quit. No, that's not an issue. These are conflating a bunch of different things. Students have never shown up on time. Maybe when they play Ohio State, they'll be there. But even then, it probably is only 80%, and you'll need until the end of the first quarter. Honestly, if I was a student and it was an 11 a.m. game against Georgia Southern, I would probably rather be knocking a few back on a 60-inch, staring at a 60-inch TV in my apartment. So I can't fault them, but you can't conflate all these things together. It's not a lack of energy, it's a lack of execution, as we've laid out. It's different schemes, and it's just taking longer than everybody would have hoped, but they've got the guy in charge that they need to have in charge to turn this thing around.
Yeah. And we'll see if they can do it. They go down to Purdue on Friday nights. We'll talk about that game coming up here on Thursday when we go to Monkston Sun Prairie for Temple and Heilprin. Jesse won't be there. I will be, but we're going to be recording a couple segments leading into that. We'll get Jesse's prediction for the Purdue game and some keys to the game as well. Keys to the win, and just how big of a game this is for Wisconsin. Maybe a measuring stick game for Wisconsin in terms of where they are and where they could be the rest of the year. Jesse, looking forward to that. We'll talk then.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.